Okay, hey folks, Mark Locklear here, and this is a screencast on Chapter 4, How to Code Control Statements. And I think most of the content in this chapter is pretty straightforward. I'll say a handful of things. I'll share my screen and just look at a few of the things in this chapter. Just say a few things about each one. I'm not going to go into uh, great detail in each section because, again, I think if you read it, um, experiment with some of the examples. Should be pretty straightforward. Obviously, let me know if you have questions, but I'll let the content stand on its own and just sort of give you a few caveats and warnings about things to be careful about in the software world. So I'm going to share my screen here, and then I'll make this a little bigger, and then I'll close this. Okay, so we'll go through a couple of things here. Boolean expressions. These are very standard for across all programming languages. I mean, they don't 100% translate, but for the most part, a lot of these equality operators, certainly the greater than and less than, you've probably seen those before at this point. Greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Again, those are all fairly straightforward. And, these can get pretty sophisticated. Just looking at some of the code examples here, I'm going to say this about the other things we look at is just be careful about getting um, too clever and too sophisticated with the use of these, because you can have very drawn out statements that have, less than this, equal to that, not equal to, and it becomes hard to, just becomes hard to look at and process. So just be careful about, there's sort of a rule of thumb out there that, when you get more than, we'll look at that on the loops, when you get more than maybe two levels deep on nested statements, that's sort of a flag or a warning sign that, okay, maybe this is more complicated than it should be, or maybe I should restructure it. And the same thing with Boolean statements like this. When you start getting into and this, but less than that, and greater than this, more than two of these statements in a single line, and again, it becomes hard to figure out what you're doing, number one. And then if you need to debug it, or if you're having an issue where you've got a logical error in your code, it becomes very difficult to debug it. So be careful about that. Um, Same with these ands and or not statements. Generally, we think of things, not be especially careful about not, because it's just hard to process when it's not this. Usually it's easier for us to sort of think in the affirmative, or like, if something's true. But when we start to say if something's not true, then it becomes a little more hard to process. So sort of think about that. If else statements, again, pretty standard. The way Java implements this is pretty standard in the way other languages do. We're going to, in the invoice application, we're going to get into some sort of nested statements. So again, just be careful of that when, within a single if else statement, if you begin to put other if or other else statements within those statements, that when we talk about a nested statement, that's what we're talking about, then again, that should be a flag that, okay, we may be doing something, not necessarily that it's wrong, but there may be a better way to do it, or a way that's a little easier to read and a little easier to debug. Okay. And again, here, the example they've got where, subtitle is greater than or equal to 100 and subtitle is less than 200. That's about max. When you start to, if you were to add another conditional or relational statement inside that single line, that's when, again, it starts to sort of, there's a point of diminishing returns there, where it starts the value of it starts to outweigh how complicated it is to implement and debug. Um, I think I'm gonna stop there. Again, I could go into, detail on all of these. switch statements. They have switch and case statements there too. Again, I'll sort of let those stand. Um, Loops. We'll be looking at while and I think we'll be looking at and using some while loops. Some these are fairly straightforward. Do while loops have sort of fallen out of favor, I think, in the last even 20 years or so. That's not to say they're not helpful and that they don't have a place, but again, just sort of just be mindful, I guess I would say, when you're implementing. Right now you are at the level where you don't have enough experience to know okay, this maybe what makes sense and what doesn't. You're just sort of looking for an end result. The more you work in the field, and again, this will be true, if you go on to do work in Python or C++ rather than Java, let's say, but each language sort of has its own preferred syntax, I'll say, and sort of preferred way of doing things. And then even beyond that, within a given team, you may have there may be a certain preference for doing things a certain way. So you'll sort of figure that out once you get out in the real world and start writing code. Okay. Um, okay. I think I'm going to let the rest of that stand on its own. What we're going to do for our coding example is we're going to look at I'm asking you to modify section 4.2, and specifically, I'm asking you to add a new customer type. So I'm just looking in Moodle sort of off screen here. It says add a customer type of E. So you're going to add a new customer type and with a discount. So if the customer type is E, you're going to add discount of 60% if their subtotal is less than 500 and 80% if they spend more than 500. Okay, so this would be a nested um, else or else if statement. And then I'm also asking you to add a final else statement that displays a particular message if the customer is not found. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a second and sort of get my development environment going, and I'll be back in a jiffy. And okay, here we go. I'm going to pause and I'll be right back. Okay. I think what I'm going to do here is just, rather than working in NetBeans, I'll show you. This will give you a glimpse into how I actually grade your assignments too. I'm just going to use good old-fashioned command line to compile and run my Java code, and then I'm going to use, let's see, I need Java. I'm going to use a standard text editor to modify modify the code. So in this case, I'm going to use the example. So again, this is exercise 4.2 in the book. So I'm going to go straight to the example solution that they have, and that's what I'm going to modify. And in fact, what I'm going to do is copy. I don't want to modify the original file, so I'm going to copy this file and I'm going to paste it onto my desktop. So here's the invoice app.java. And then I'm going to change directory into my desktop. And then I'm going to do Sublime. Sublime is sort of my text editor of choice. I've been using it for probably over a decade now, and that's just what I use. VS Code is probably more popular these days, but Sublime works for me, and I like it, so it's what I use. So if I want to compile, so again, in a scenario like this, and I think Sublime has a plugin it's involved where you can compile and run within Sublime, but it's because of I use GCC or I use the version of Java that I use. And there's some other technical issues where it's just, for me at least, it's just easier to compile and run from the command line. So for instance, what I can do here is I can do Java C, in this case, invoice.app. Now notice what happens if I look on my desktop. Notice that I've got this invoice app.class. So that's the compiled version of the Java program. And now if I want to run it, I just do Java and then I do the name of the file. And so you can see I get the standard output here. Okay. And just so you know, again, when I grade your applications, that's why I ask you just to submit the Java files. When I grade that, that's what I do is I open the command line up. It's just a lot faster too than me having to use a mouse to click through all of your assignments and open NetBeans each time. It's just much, for me at least, it's much, much faster to do it from the command line. Okay, so for our assignment, I'm asking you to add a customer type of E for employee, and then this discount percent range. Probably not going to implement this discount percent range 100% for you. I just want to sort of get you going and sort of show you how to get started, but we'll get started on it. So, in this case, you're going to be modifying this. I could code this out by hand, but like a lot of things, I'm just going to go in here. I know I want to add another else if statement, right? Because we're going to add one for E. So I'm just going to go in and do this. And then let's get our formatting straight here. And then, so I'm just going to go in and do this and add a case statement for E. And in fact, just to sanity check this, I'm going to, I don't know, let's just add something like 0.7 because there's not anything. So with this addition that I've made, I can sort of quickly test this out and see if it works. A couple things about Sublime, separate from the logic here, is notice that, again, this is just a text editor I'm using to modify this Java program. So notice I don't get the red squiggly lines if something's wrong. I don't get the IntelliSense or anything like that. So very sort of stripped down meat and potatoes version of a text editor here without all of the bells and whistles you might get in a true, I guess I won't say a true IDE, a more robust IDE. Okay. So I need to compile this again to actually test it out. So I'm going to compile it. Now I'm going to run it. And so if I test out E, so in this case, and if it's E, the discount percent should be 7%. So if I make this easy, let's do 100. Yeah, okay, right. So it gives me 70%. So that seems to be working, right? So now I can go in and add my logic. So in this case, it said if their discount, that their discount should be 60% if the subtotal is less than 500. So this is going to be, probably really similar to something like this, right? Not going to do it for you, just going to stop there, but you can sort of see how that might be implemented there. And then the other thing I asked you to do is add a final else statement at the end, right? So I would simply go in here and do an else statement. And I think I can just close that, and then let's try a print statement. System out.print. Let's do something like this. I'm just going to paste that in. And this would say, if I say invalid input, let's just do it like that. So I'm going to save that, come back here and compile, run it. So in this case, if I enter anything other than R, C, T, or E, I should get an invalid input. So let's do V. Now, notice that did not work the way I expected, right? I did get invalid input. However, I'm still getting a discount percent there. So Trying to decide now whether I want to let you figure out that issue or not. Let me pause for a second and let me look at this a little further, and then I'll come back and maybe give you a hint as to what's going on. Okay. So what's happening here, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you stop and look at it, but I needed to take time to look at it, is so we added our else statement that does catch anything other than R, C, E, or T. However, if we just, read down through the program from a procedural perspective, right? We successfully display invalid input. However, we're still doing all this math, right? We're still getting a discount amount, subtotal, and then we're displaying these other things. So, what is a way that we can essentially say, hey, if we reach this else statement, let's just stop the program? Well, the way to do that is by using a break statement, right? Break basically says, hey, break out of break out, not just break out of the loop. I think continue maybe breaks out of the loop, but to break out of the program entirely and basically just stop. And so if we do, yeah, let's make sure that works the way. So I compiled, and then if I run this again and I enter a letter other than R, C, T, or E, now it still asks me for subtotal, which from a usability standpoint is not the greatest thing, but notice I just display the invalid input message, and I just leave the program. And now let's test a valid input and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. Yep, that looks good. Yes, I can also test E. That looks good. And then no. Okay. From a testing standpoint, notice that I went through all those different code paths is what I often like to refer to those as, especially I mean, this is not a terribly sophisticated if else statement, but it's not, I mean, if you looked at the total number of code paths here, that's one way to think about this, right? If you look at the total number of code paths here, we can count each one of these if and if else statements, and each one of these would be a code path, right? One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, I guess, with this too. So technically, to properly test this, you need to run the program 10 different times and put in the input that's going to hit each one of these code paths. And anytime you make a change, so for instance, I added this else statement at the end. Anytime you make a change like that, if you're going to properly test it, you need to go back through each one of those 10 code paths to properly test it. Now, we know from because we understand the code, for instance, if I went in and added under customer type R, if I go in and add an additional if statement here, I probably only need to test the R code path, right? I probably don't need to test C, E, and T. But again, be careful. It's easy to get bitten by that. You'll think, because I'm only testing this section, but again, you just need to be careful. I can tell you from an industry standpoint, generally, generally the way you test when we talk about properly doing quality assurance testing, you would go back and test all those code paths again, even though logically it wouldn't make sense maybe that you would need to. I mean, I will say too that modern software testing has all automated tests. So you've got a test suite that you can just run the entire suite, and you don't have to manually go in and test those things. Now, the testing you all are doing, you're not at that level, so you're just going to be manually testing all of your code. But anyway, make sure you go back, and when you make a change to an application, you're going back through and testing all code paths. Okay, enough. I'll stop there. If you have questions, let me know. Thanks.